section of the agenda for public discussion and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments as posted next to the signage. We have two people signed up. One is Mr. Mike Vito on the capital project.
Anyway, my name is Mike Gatos. I'm a lifetime Newburgh resident, a graduate of 1981. And I sat on this committee deliberating for months to come up with a plan which met the needs of the students, the teachers, and the taxpayers, which is very important. All schools will have proper heating, air conditioning, along with technology to give each student a better education and environment to be in. A student needs to be in an environment which they want to learn. It's not too hot, so they're focused during class and testing. And more likely, where people become irritable and to be a distraction in class. Learning and teaching should be enjoyable, not a chore. The project will employ local men and women of the local community, contractors and vendors for materials, which will stimulate the local economy. There was a lot of time spent on this project. It's important that we give the students, teachers, and staff the best facility our tax dollars will allow. So I would urge the board to vote for this project. It's needed. There's other communities, there's other schools that are surpassed where we are at this point. I think it's unfair to give our children a disadvantage at this point. There's a lot of things we discussed. There could be a lot more that we hope for, but what the budget we have, the tax dollars that will be implemented on the taxpayers, we felt that this was a compromise that will not only suffice for now, and I think it's a good project. I hope that you will vote for this.
Thank you, Mr. Colada.
Thank you. Good evening. I have to agree with everything the gentleman has just spoken about. Tonight, the board will consider these two building bond proposals for a public vote, and both do have merit. Proposition 4, I believe, though, has a problem with its design. Proposition 4, I believe, if I understood the numbering correctly, asks voters to approve two distinct projects. The first is to address the long-awaited remediation, repairs, and rebuilding of our school buildings. The second part asks for voters to approve construction of a new CTE center. The problem, as I see it, is that voters are not permitted to make a clear and distinct decision about each one. Each project in this proposition has a distinctly different purpose. The first is to, of course, address long-delayed and arguably ignored promises to improve the aging infrastructure and replace temporary enclosed structures over the past 10+ years. The second part is to build an entirely new center. We have learned that each part has also a different funding mechanism as well, and each has a differing effect on future taxes. The voters deserve to have an opportunity to judge each of its own on its distinct merits, needs, and costs to taxpayers. It has been argued that the two projects should not be separated. It has been implied that the CTE Center proposal could fail voter approval if it is stood on its own. Based on this argument, it appears that the long-delayed projects promised to New Windsor, Dales Gate, South Main, and all the other buildings are being held hostage in order to get the desired outcome of approval for a new, unrelated project. Voters have but one choice now: approve it or get nothing for now. Each school, their staffs, families, and community have waited and waited for the district to address the many long-delayed infrastructure problems and needs. It is to the board's credit that the necessary steps have been taken to see these issues identified and eventually will be resolved. It is questionable, though, why the board attaches an unrelated issue, a new building project, to this long-awaited and delayed need to address these existing building problems. Again, one has nothing to do with the other, is about fulfilling promises to bring conditions in all buildings up to par, and the other is about a new direction. It has been argued that there are many educational reasons to support a CTE center designed to provide much-needed skills to secure careers beyond academic field. The voters deserve to judge that argument and the need on its own merits and not slip in to piggyback on a long-awaited need to upgrade, repair, and fulfill long-delayed promises. I ask the board to amend the current resolution to separate the building of the new CTE building and center from Proposition 4 and present the CTE center as a separate proposal for vote of approval. Let it stand on its own merit. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board on agenda items?
I'm sorry, I left one part out there. You don't want
You can only come up once. No,
to.
you can't rebut. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Good work.
Nope, I'm sorry.
You're the boss, you're the boss.
I am the boss. Leave me in thing. Okay. Since there's nobody else, I'd like to turn this over to our superintendent, Dr. Padilla.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, everyone. I have two items for discussion this evening. The first one being 3.1. It's a revisit of a presentation that we gave on February 27th. And so what we would like to do this evening is go through the presentation again and share some of the changes that have been made. So in discussion with teachers and administrators and with students, we recognize that the landscape in education is constantly changing, and in order to meet the needs of our students and staff, we're proposing some new ideas to some degree. In our last presentation, we highlighted two school ideas, one being a junior high school, the second being a night school. And since that presentation and listening to the questions and the feedback, and thereafter with various employees in the school district, we're going to pause on the junior high school for September at this point. It is something that perhaps we may revisit in the future, but as of today, we're going to pause on the junior high and continue our work instead with the night school. So we highlighted the purpose, what ESSA is now requiring of school districts, specifically of high schools, and the very important need to make sure there are just more options. And so whether that's an option for children to be duly enrolled, both during the day and at night, ensuring that we're providing flexibility to the extent possible. We want to encourage our children to take CTE courses. Many of them do. It's very popular in our school district for reasons that help to prepare them for life after academy field. We have a number of children who simply want to take advanced coursework but can't fit it into their program during the day, like English as a second language. So we have students who, because of state mandates, can only fit but so much into their program, and consequently are not able to take some of these other courses. And so that's reflected in our data. So the target population, I already started to highlight some of that. We want to encourage flexibility. We want to encourage students to take courses during the day and also at night. We want to address a population of students who are overaged and undercredited. And so our 19-year-olds, our 20-year-olds who really can't graduate because they don't have enough credits. We want to make sure there's an opportunity for them to continue to be educated, but in a different setting. Our English language learners, I mentioned. My clicker's working So design features. So what we're going to spend the bulk of our time, Dr. Spindler and I, will start to highlight some of the changes that we made since our first go-around. Still, obviously, are targeting high school students, the enrollment of students, the location of students, and hours of operation are significantly what has changed since then. And so, Lisa Marie, if you want to go ahead and address the hours of operation and also
It's actually going to be 1:30 to 8:45. So there's an additional 15 minutes so that they can have 5 minutes in between classes. And you'll see that reflected in the last slide. We do want to keep the grade span between 10 to 12 and a smaller enrollment. And future phases still will include opportunities such as adult learning, career planning, and CTE. You can go to the next slide. Good to go? No, I'll just keep going and eventually it'll follow me. Next slide. Okay, so we want to keep in mind flexible scheduling. So again, in the last slide, you'll see the various opportunities for flexible scheduling, as well as increased access to AP, college, CTE. What has changed is the content focus for each day. Rather than it just being focused on each day, you'll see reflected in it a flexible schedule, allowing for maybe here's one day that you're taking a course, maybe it's a 2 days. So it's going to look more or similar to a college schedule. And there will be 1.5 hour periods, and there may be some courses that are 3-hour block periods. So we took a combination of feedback from different stakeholders and increased the flexibility in scheduling. You can go to the next slide. Okay. Dual enrollment. So we hope to have a full-time staff of an administrator, a nurse, a security guard, a typist, and a minimum of 4 core teachers, so a school within a school. And then extra earning staff based on need and enrollment in all subject areas and electives, E&L services, special education, reading specialist, math specialist, a counselor and social worker, and a CTE pathway instructor.
So what's important to note here is that there'll be a dedicated staff, and obviously all of this is still up for discussion. We still have to do some work with the MTA leadership team to talk about what this would look like for various staff members, but at least ensure that there's a dedicated staff who haven't worked all day long and then are, signing on to work an additional 6 hours in the evening to support many of our students who would love to take advantage of a program like this. So it's a combination of some people who are full-time versus others based on need would be brought on.
Okay, so here's an example of what the evening school schedule would look like. So if you follow the color coding. Important on Mondays to have, for the staff to start with the prep. And from the 1:30 to 2 o'clock, I don't know why it's not showing on the slide, Dr. Dia, would be a lunch for the staff, and then they would go into a student support. We'll probably see it. And then course 1, you'll see, is offered on Mondays and Wednesdays. And course 2 is also offered on Mondays and Wednesdays. So as a student, I can be enrolled in course 1 and 2 on Mondays and Tuesdays, or I can be enrolled in just course 1 or course 2. If you look at the Tuesday, Thursday schedule, they mirror each other, again with a different hour-and-a-half time slots. On Wednesday, you'll see a block time for course 7, as well as course 8 and 9 on Fridays. And that's where we anticipate to see an opportunity for CTE that can benefit from an extended period of time, as well as possibly an accelerated course where the child could only give up maybe 1 day a week because of their extracurricular activities. We can go to the next slide. Might be a little clearer. Yep. Is it? Okay. Sorry. Okay. So there you can see a schedule, a draft schedule of what a teacher's schedule might look like. So I would come in for the lunch from 1:30 to 2. On Mondays, a principal meeting. And you'll see here on Mondays also having either PD or common planning time. I think that that's really important, especially for that core group of teachers, to have some common planning time to talk about students or engage in professional development. Our current administrative staff and teachers engage in faculty meetings, professional development during that same time slot, so it would afford them to be engaged with the faculty that's available during the day as well. Their prep period would be there, and then they would teach a course 1 and a course 2, and again, follow the schedule. So you'll see that there's a prep allotted each day. And then there's also either an AIS and support or lab, either a science lab or a writing or math lab embedded in the schedule as well. The student support period that you see there is embedded every day from 2 to 2:30, probably similar to the way you would see a college professor have office hours. So during that time, I might meet with a student support team to talk about a student's plan. I might meet with parents, I might meet with a small group of teachers, and then I'm also there and available to have embedded time to help a student who might need extra support.
So this is just a sample. There are many different options and many different ways to go about creating schedules for both students and staff for this kind of program. So at this time, Madam President, I'd like to open up the floor for questions or comments.
Board members, questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Levinstein?
So I see this as a vast undertaking for a couple of reasons, because it looks like there's like 5 different groups of students that we're trying to have classes for. Some may be that want to have an advanced placement class. Some who have challenges outside of school that affect them coming to the day. You have English language learners, you have overage and undercredited students that may have to recover a class, and then you have CTE. So those 5 different, they're really different and distinct group of students. So I can see that by a schedule there, it's going to be hard to accommodate what people might want if you're going to try to do all 5 groups from the beginning. So I don't know. The other thing that I saw on what was sent to us is admissions criteria, and that seemed to me, well, what was marked, and I don't know if this is all in the draft stage and planning, but it says have completed at least 1 year, be underaccredited, experienced schedule prevented opportunities, and then the last one was approved by principal, but nothing for someone who say, hey, I want to take an AP class. I mean, that's not, they wouldn't fall into any of those categories.
So someone who wants to take the AP class would fall into maybe a scheduling concern, so that it doesn't fit into their schedule. So that's where you would see that.
But yes, this is still under draft. So, and I understand where you're going with the different kinds of students who could benefit from this. Part of what we would do is take a look at, how to scale this up. So what does year 1 look like? What does year 2, 3, et cetera?
And the other thing, it seems that everywhere it's marked dual enrollment. Does that mean anything, that someone would not just be in this evening?
So dual enrollment could be that you are part of the day program and the night program. It also could mean that I'm dually enrolled in a high school course and a college parent course.
Mr. Strider?
I had a couple of questions on the staffing. You had your list where you had the full-time staff and then the extra earning staff based on the needs. And I come up with 11 total staff members that you don't have as additional hires. You must be taking them from other places for this program. Like the administrator. We don't have an administrator on the list as a hire, so you must be taking an administrator from someplace else. Same thing for the typist, the 4 core teachers, E&L special ed, reading specialist, math specialist, and social worker.
So, yeah, let me
So if you need a special education teacher, that would have to be one of the 4 core?
So the administrator, we currently have a vacant administrator position. we would use that for the night school. The nurse, the security guard, the typist are all on the FTE breakdown for this evening. So those would be new positions. They would be the only new positions. And the 4 cores, we would pull from our day program.
So you would take, did you say typist was a new position? So I don't see it on the list.
Yeah, it's only what's on the
Right?
FTE breakdown.
I just want to make sure, because there are a number of, you say you have an extra administrator that's not filled, but we added one because of a need. So it's an additional administrator that we are actually hiring, but we had to hire him in advance. As far as the one security guard, I don't know what type of space you have laid out for the classrooms, but I don't think that's enough, because you probably have one entry and one exit. Well, what happens if something happens? The security guard will leave the front to go handle something, and then you're unmanned in the front. So probably at least 2. Typists, if you're taking it from someplace else, they're already stretched too thin. And then, as far as taking teachers from other subject classes, that means you're increasing the class sizes someplace else. So, I don't think that works. Then you have the busing issue. How is that going to work if you have a student that is in the day classes and then goes until, say, 5 o'clock? Is there a bus scheduled for the 5 o'clock and then the 6 o'clock and the 7, 8? How did the kids get home? There's somebody else.
Anybody else have questions, Ms. Brooks?
Well, in the past, when we had night school, they found their own, they got their own way home. It was, in night school, in all the years that we had it, there was never a bus provided for night school. They said, and there was kids back then that were dual, that went to school during the day, and then they went to night school, and they got rides, they got their way home. I mean, we did that for years, and it worked. We cut it out in, when we had the big cuts, right? There was 10, 9 or 10 or something like that. But, you know, we had it bigger than that. There was many different teachers. There adults went to night school. It was a phenomenal program that we had. It was, yeah, adult in the community, yes, right.
Board members, any other questions? Or should I go back to Mr. Strong? You ready?
So what is the total cost per year of running phase 1? Year one, what does it cost to start it up, staff it, and make sure they have everything they need down to the copy paper?
So it's hard at this moment to give a final cost of what that would be, because we still need to identify certain students. And again, based on the need of various students, such as an E&L or a special ed student who might want to be enrolled in the program, we'll determine things like if we need a special ed teacher in the night program at all. A lot of that's going to be contingent on the kinds of students we identify in the spring. We're not asking, just so the audience is clear, tonight is simply to have a conversation about these ideas, to get input from you, to hear your questions. As we move through March and April, we'll be bringing to you a final proposal once we've gathered enough input from you all and others.
So do you know the base cost, not including all the extra earnings? What does it cost to have that base program?
So base being just the new staff that we would need to run the program.
And there's
That's
no
it.
additional cost that you can think of that would come from running the school until 8:30 at night?
Basic cost right now, this is where we're at. Yeah.
Mr. Johnson?
I have just a couple of questions. I'm also curious about the wide variety of students that that the night school will be servicing. And I'm curious, are there particular categories that would be targeted to be the initial population of the school? Is there a priority, or will you be seeking students from particular categories to enroll? Yeah, and I'm also curious if you have a strategy around the staffing for AP or college classes. Is the idea to use some kind of online system, or would teachers be acquired kind of based upon the student interest, or how would that be resolved?
So for the AP courses, they are trained through the College Board, so it would have to be someone who has gone through that professional development, and if it's in the College Board approved, and if it's a dual enrollment course, such as university or Marist or another college, they're always vetted by that college. So we want to make sure that they have, the appropriate professional development and certification to be able to teach it. At this time, we are not considering a blended opportunity of learning or online for our accelerated courses.
Just one other thought, and that would be, have you made any effort to kind of seek out whether there are students that would be interested? Has there been kind of outreach to the students just to see if there are students out there that say, yeah, I would come to night school, and I would be interested in those kinds of offerings? It might be something just to kind of gauge the interest.
We could certainly do more of it. I'll say that over the last several years, we often have encountered families and students who, because of how packed their schedules are, didn't have access to band, music, or various AP courses specifically. We often get a lot of, if we have overage, undercredited kids, what else could we be doing? What other opportunities could we give them since they're so far behind? I would say those are probably the two general comments that we often get. And we believe this will help us to satisfy those particular requests.
Mr. Stradani?
If you have a dual enrollment student that has lunch at, say, 9:30 in the morning, and they're taking classes to, say, 4 or 5 o'clock, is there any kind of legal requirement, certain hours that go by, that they have to provide another meal?
So we already provide in some programs dinner, and we anticipate that this would also be part of what we would offer. So,
Just in between those blocks?
yeah, so a student schedule who is, for instance, just enrolled in the night school, we see that we would have to provide them a meal. For the example that you're talking about, it's something that we could try to factor in as well. So if you're enrolled for a certain part of the day and the evening, when do you get a chance to eat?
Mr. Walker?
I like the idea, but I have one question, and that concerns student enrollment and how they're placed there. I would hope that the student enrollment night school would be seen as providing, like you said, additional help and work for students. But I would think we might need a policy to make sure that it's not used as a threat for kids who may have bad behaviors in the other schools. I wouldn't want it to turn into that. Thank you.
Board members, any other questions or comments?
Okay, so we will take back these questions and continue to work with our bargaining units and continue to finalize this before it's brought back to you. Madam President, I'd like to go ahead and move on to 3.2. And just for the audience and for new board members, the way we structure budget discussions, I'll just wait until it gets pulled up so that way the audience can also follow along with us. So this evening, we're going to go through 1010 through 2060. So that's Board of Education all the way through administration. By way of protocols that we've used in the past, I will start with the first, Board of Education, 1010 through 1060 and stop and ask for the board to have any input or questions. And when there's not, we'll continue through the next section, which is chief school administrator and so on. All right, so at this time, Madam President, I'd like to start with Board of Education 1010 through 1060 for questions or comments.
Just as a note, there was an additional page that was given to everybody in your pack, in the weekly, that had anything over 10%.
Minus,
Explain that?
yeah, minus 10, plus or minus 10%.
So that first item, 1010, has an explanation on the separate sheet. Okay, are there any questions or comments on 1010, 1060? Yes.
That sheet that you said with the 10%, is that public, the public document?
No, it doesn't need to, right?
So yes, it can be.
Okay, are there any questions on 1010, 1060? Yes, Mr. Stradone.
It's on 1010 and 1040, could you just explain why the increase? Was there a need specifically on any of those two items?
Mr. Kern?
On 1010, that's the Board Tax Pro. We went through a different version of Board Tax for, what's it called? This is software that we use here for the board data and the information that goes back and forth between board members.
So in addition to board meetings, now we'll be able to post to the public to see advisory committees and such. So greater access and more usage of the software.
This report is all contractual.
Mr. Kern, can I ask you to please talk into the microphone?
Okay,
Sometimes
yeah.
it's hard to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you much.
So we're okay with 1010 to 1060. Can we move on? Thank you.
Okay, Chief School Administrator, 1240, questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Stradone.
Since 2016, there's been a $655,000 increase in that line item. Is that particularly, this item is only for 2 people? Or is it 3 employees on that line item?
With the chief school administrator, there's 2 people on
And so the increase is also contractual?
It's contractual here. Also, there's, in the 1240 line, there's also the staff that goes along with them.
Has there been an increase in staff for this budget?
No.
Any other questions on that item, please? 1240. Thank you.
Next section, Business Administration, codes 1310 through 1345. Any questions or comments?
On 1320, you do have a note from the page. Mr. Stradone?
Again, I know I asked for this for the board members, but we didn't get a response back. I wanted to see the 16, 17, or the breakdowns of each item, so we can see where the increase was, like we used to get back in 2016, 17. So back in 16, 17, the number for that column is $544,000. Now it's $1.2 million. Now, there could have been more staff put into that column, but I'm noticing a pattern that since 16, 17, there's been an exponential increase in a lot of these line items. And we really need to look at whether we're getting the bang for the buck on a lot of these columns. Because what's going to happen, we get another recession, we're going to have to cut back, and we need to know those line items, where these increases come from. So we could look at the budget with data, with more intelligence, rather than just the one column that just says 10% increase, but the public doesn't know where it's coming from. It could be a breakdown, like in 16, 17, we had support services, conference expenses, travel expenses. We need to know where that increase is coming from, and the public needs to know.
So it's really hard to look at 16, 17 compared to this budget because over the last several years, as you know, we have been right-sizing the budget. And so just for the audience, what I mean by that is based on reporting to SED, making sure that various personnel or resources are in the right categories. So looking at that compared to this, in some ways, well, first, all of us don't have the 16, 17 budget in front of us. But even in this budget, we have indicated to you all how we have moved a substantial amount of people into a different line that's more appropriate.
I understand that, that's a good thing. But back in 16, 17, we had more of a breakdown. When you do a budget at home, you just don't say utilities. You try to break it down, cable, electric, gas, so you can see where your increases are. Same thing with the budget here. We need to know where the increases are so we can kind of see the trend.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Mr. Levinstein?
So my concern is a little different, and looking at adopted budgets and proposed, I'd rather see true budgets, what was actually spent, not what was adopted, because sometimes there are changes there. So in this section, 1310, it's going up 5%, which is probably in line with some of it. But the adjustments we made to this year's budget, so that's 612, it was last year's amount, 612,000. But we've made a $150,000 adjustment to the account for this current year that we're in. So my question is, I mean, I know there are things that are unusual that may come up and cause that. So I'm just wondering, there's a couple of items, and I'll bring up the other one when we get to it, that it seemed, if we adjusted in half a year, 150,000, why is this line item only going up 31,000 for next year? And there certainly could be valid reasons, but I don't see it here.
One of the reasons that it's up 150,000 this year is this is where we put the money that's come in for the items from the assemblyman and the senator. There's about $140,000 that came in there. And there's been some adjustments to the service contract that we have with one of the vendors that we have in the business office. We had to up that a little bit.
Okay, well, so, but part of that's the revenue side, what came in. This is the expense.
This is the when you bring it in on the revenue side, you have to offset it with the expense side. It was placed into a 1310-201 account, which is an equipment account for keeping until we're ready to use it as a district.
Okay, so it hasn't been spent, but it's been put in that line item in this current year. Thank you.
Board, any other questions on those items?
Okay, Legal Human Services, codes 1420 through 1480. Any questions or comments?
There are notes on 1420 and 1480. You don't have these? Wait, look at what.
Is it on board?
Yeah. Okay. Was it the week? Got it? Okay, so we're on 1420 to 1480, and that is legal human resources. Anybody questions, comments? No?
Okay, Central Services, code 1620 through 1680. Any questions or comments?
Note that 1620 has a note on it, because it went up a lot. Go ahead, Mr. Sternad.
So the top item, operation of the plan, is a $4.2 million increase. Could someone explain the breakdown of how we got another $4.2 million in that column?
Yeah, with guidance coming through the business officials, we have moved security from the 2110 code, which is an instruction code, to the 1620 code, which is operations. There was $3.3 million moved there. And we also have the expense for the SROs is in there, and that's for a total of $700,000. And then we have the operational increases in the in salary in that line.
Go ahead, Mr. Stringer, you look what's good.
Yeah. So you're saying the security is a $3 million move?
Correct.
Security personnel or
Security personnel, equipment, supplies, the whole unit was moved out of an instructional code, which has been placed by the district for the last couple of years, into an operational code where it should be as an operation item.
Okay. That explains it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with the night school, nothing like that?
No.
Okay. And on the maintenance of the plant, we have actually gone down since 2016 in maintenance. But knowing that the condition of the schools and how much maintenance that we need, this item should have been increasing every year. We know we need maintenance of the school buildings, and we're doing the bond because we haven't maintained the schools. So that item should be addressed.
Take that under advisement.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yeah, just another one of the points that I make on 1680. Again, it's going up some, but in this current year again, we have a $418,000 adjustment for that account. So again, I'm just looking if that's something going forward, if that's a placeholder, or what the story is with that. 1680?
Yes.
So for half of the year, we put in $418,000 for this current year.
Some of the money that is in that line there was carried over as an encumbrance from the previous year, so it'll show up in the adjustment account going forward. And that money there would have been revenue that would have been carried over from last year as a reserve for encumbrance.
Mr. Stringer?
So now that security is in operation as a plant, are there any chances in this budget that we can get the security that we asked for and we approved as a board last year, a security analysis? Was that ever done? Because, Mr. Howard, you remember this, we talked about this for 2 years in a row. We finally got the vote for it, but it was never done. At least to my knowledge, it wasn't. So, looking at the situations we have now, shouldn't we do the security analysis before we finalize this year's budget?
We've increased security personnel just about every year. So if you are asking us to go back and take a look,
Will the board approve the security analysis? I'm not too sure what the amount was. There must have been some kind of limit. But we authorized the administration to do the proper audit or check on what each building needed based on the situations, the coverages, and we got nothing.
I'll go back to my notes. I know we've done various audits as we were going through the bond process. So
I remember what happened. We asked for it. What came back to us was something that was way, way, way more than we had expected. And we didn't, because it was a resolution a long time ago. It came back and it was really much more and included more than we even wanted. It was like some weird thing. And so we didn't vote it forward. But it never happened when we did ask for it to happen. So I think we do. Go ahead, Ms. Prakash.
Yes, that's true, and then we hired a supervisor of the security, of safety, and he was supposed to coordinate, now he's left, so, but it was an astronomical amount of money that they were gonna charge. And then we hired, that person, and he was supposed to then, coordinate a study.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President. In regards to what Mr. Strickland was referring to, we authorized it, we never received it. And as a report, and it was reported that we requested so that we can see where we stood from a security standpoint in our buildings and give us a breakdown of each building. It was a real simple request, and we haven't received it.
I agree, and I think we really need it, but I think we have to be really specific on what we want.
Absolutely, that's
Instead
what
of
we
getting
want.
something that's not going to be useful.
Yeah, and I just want to caution everyone, constant requests are made. This team does a tremendous job of trying to fulfill all the requests that are made. So I don't want anyone leaving here thinking that requests are made and they're falling on deaf ears, because that's not the case at all. We have partnered with a number of organizations, and the most recently that you all approved was the multi-million-dollar Smart Bond Act that focused solely on security and safety. And so we did have an organization come in and go through every space just about in our buildings to look through the lens of security and safety. Now that might be a little different than what was requested, but you heard from two board members perhaps some of the confusion of why a specific report didn't come back to the board, because what was presented seemed to be above and beyond, specifically around the expense of it.
Mr. Fortune?
So, for clarity purposes, the analysis that you're requesting at this point, would that be a staffing analysis or an operational kind of safety audit? What Dr. Padilla just mentioned, which was done during the Smart School Bond Act, was more of the operational, the plant, the buildings, and we did receive a report out of that. I believe what I hear Mr. Stritter referring to was the actual analysis of the security monitors across the district, and is it the right number of security?
No.
Could you clarify for us exactly what you're asking?
Let's start with Mr. Howard.
Okay, so, and this is not an attack on anyone, what we asked for was an external audit done on what we do from a security standpoint in our district. We wanted fresh eyes, we wanted clean eyes on it, instead of doing it internally with somebody who's a part of this district. We wanted it to come from someone on the outside to make sure that everything was being done so that we know that our children and our district is safe. That's all we asked for.
So just a follow-up, was the work that took place for the Smart Bond that resulted in $3.5 million just for security and safety?
Right, but that information wasn't disaggregated to specifically address what we asked for.
But I think in addition, I think, Mr. Howard, as a former principal, I would like help to know where the critical areas are and how to help in deploying staff to make sure that my staff and my
Absolutely,
kids are safe.
and that information would have gave the building leaders that information. That, what we were requesting would have given those building leaders the information on their particular buildings, if they are safe, if they're not where they need to be, where they can be brought up to where suspects where they thought it was a safe environment. That was all. And from that big report, you can break it down to small reports.
Mr. Stern,
The people that work in the buildings have given the input of where the problems are. Combine that with the external person that comes in to each building to generate a report on a combination of the smart bond, the people that work in the building, the administrators, all come together to make a report saying, okay, this building needs this. There's a map of the building, each floor. Here are the weak spots. This is what we need. You could do, 3 monitors, 6 security cameras, locks on the, automatic locks on the doors, whatever they're gonna do. But if you have 30-something entrances to a building and you have
more security guards at the end of the day, you don't know what's happening. I mean, you have to have a combination of technology, people, and common sense. So this is what we thought we were going to get last year. And so that went to the Buildings and Grounds Committee, that report, or that number that came back. What happened? Like, I never saw that.
So I'm taking a lot of notes. I'm certainly going to go back with the team, but exactly what's being discussed took place with Intralogic, where they identified cameras, they identified the quality of cameras, they identified a number of things that ultimately made it in the smart bond that is waiting approval at SED. And that's a multi-million-dollar plan just for security and safety based on the exact things you guys are talking about, that you approved.
The camera's not going to stop the fight. The camera's not going to be there when a kid needs them. So it's a combination of technology and people. So that analysis by someone from outside, like Mr. Howard said, would be what we thought we were going to get. So did it go to Buildings and Grounds? Is that where that report showed up? Because I don't know if any of the old members saw that.
So I'm going to circle back. I don't have those specific notes in front of me right now, but that, we'll after today's meeting, we'll circle back to what took place or what didn't take place. And again, just to sound like a broken record, an independent person did come into the district, meet with principals, walk the buildings with the principals, specifically with the lens of security and safety. That took place in every single building and resulted in a multi-million-dollar security and safety plan.
And the feedback was given to the buildings?
I believe so, but to be certain, let's make sure we write that note down.
Mr. Johnston, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to confirm that line 1620, operation of plant, is that where the addition of SRO officers is anticipated for next year?
Yes, they are.
And is that an increase of 6 for a total of 7 at a cost of $600,000?
Yep.
Or a total of 700?
There's an increase of 600 for a total of 7, yes.
Thank you. I have a few comments about that. With all the other measures being taken to improve security, I think we should consider whether this large expense is necessary. The idea of SROs has been around for a while, and the research is very unclear on the benefits of SROs. Some research even suggests that SROs do not have a positive effect on students' perception of safety in schools. I would ask the administration if they've looked at some of this research or if they could. And I would ask the board to consider whether a full-time police presence in our schools creates the school atmosphere that we are trying to encourage in the district. This is a large sum of money, and I would prefer to see it spent in a way that more directly benefits students.
Mr. Johnson, thank you for sharing your position on this. If you remember, part of the budget rollout, this was one of the items on there, and to quote my own self, I guess, that's the thing, I indicated that understanding philosophically that there would be people who strongly are in favor and strongly oppose having armed officers in our schools. And I also remember sharing that we're the only district in the county that has metal detectors, and just about every other district in the county has moved towards having armed officers in their buildings. But the research is, you're right, there are pros and cons to having armed officers in schools. It's a proposal at this point, and certainly I would love to hear from the entire board as to whether this $600,000 is the right $600,000 to spend. I think that's a worthy conversation to have. And I understand based on the town halls that we conducted, there were families that were absolutely in favor and some that were opposed. And we knew that making this proposal. But in the end, this is about keeping our kids and our staff safe. And I think this district, I commend for the number of measures that we've taken to keep people safer. So whether that's a multi-million-dollar plan sitting at the state waiting approval that will increase the quality of our cameras, not only the quality, but the number of cameras throughout the district, I think increases almost 1,000. We have reinforced vestibules across the district. We have metal detectors now in every single building, where before it was just secondary. And I think those are aggressive measures to take, but I think they're the right measures to take given it where we're at today. So Madam President, I would like to hear from the whole board if you can take a consensus on whether or not we should expend $600,000 on armed officers. And if it's not a consensus, then my team and I will go back and rethink how to use that money.
Before we do that, Mr. Stradone, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to know the specific buildings that they would be in, and are there just one per school, or are there multiple at others?
So I don't, so it would be all buildings. So all buildings. Obviously, 7 doesn't put one in every building every single day, but I don't want to go into the district strategy on how the armed officers will be used in the buildings, because I think that's a safety breach. So I'll say, at least at this point, that what we're proposing is a total of 7 armed officers that will be deployed in our buildings. And I'd like to not share more than that, because I think it's a safety matter.
Ms. Prakash?
Yes, I agree very much with Mr. Johnston. I never have, and I do not like armed officers in a building, especially in elementary school. I mean, some of the schools have their officers that come in and do talks, that to me is fine. But having an armed officer in a building, I've never liked it, and I still don't. So I would not be in favor of it.
Ms. Burton?
So I think I don't like it as well. I think it poses a cultural issue as well, particularly when you have a district like Newburgh, in Large City School District, I'll say specifically Newburgh, that is predominantly Black and Hispanics, that definitely have issues with police officers in their communities, in Black communities. We know all about the Black Lives Matter movement. So, without any, further inquiry around the cultural component of it, I would say no.
Mr. Johnston, would you like to add something?
Sure, just a brief suggestion. I would say that if any of the district's efforts to improve literacy are proving successful or can present a need for additional funding or staff, I think the money would be better spent there. So no on the SROs.
Ms. Santiago?
Thank you. I too am not in favor of the SROs either. I agree with Mr. Johnson. With all the items and all the upgrades that we're doing to security, I don't think there's a need for it. As Mr. Johnson said, there is a lot of information out there on whether they're helpful or not. I was just reading an article yesterday that I almost forwarded to you, and I held back and didn't. Another thing is, I was at one of the town hall meetings, and the group that I was sitting here, they really weren't for it either. I thought there was a lot of discussion about mental health and support that way. Thank you.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you. I, too, am not for it, but I am somewhat more of a fence sitter at this point. I would have to do research, which I haven't done yet. I totally hate the idea of students walking into a school that looks like they're about to be processed through some type of jail system or the like. But I would have to read more. Thank you.
Mr. Stradiner?
I'm not against the idea of SROs, because I think at the high school, it is a positive, it's been a positive for the district. But the plan, it doesn't seem to be, that when you say you want 7 total, but they're gonna be around, not specifically in a school, you don't really know if they're gonna be there when they need to be there. So you either go all in, or you don't go there at all. So, I mean, the way it's laid out right now, I can't support it.
If I can just quickly
each of the police precincts, talk to the personnel there. I just don't think it's something we can share publicly for safety reasons.
Mr. Levinstein?
I'm in favor of the SROs, and I think it can create a better relationship between students and law enforcement.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President. I want to preface my response with this. When we didn't leave here last meeting, and as Mr. Johnson did, I did a lot of research, and one of my most important things, I want our buildings to be safe for our teachers, for our children, and for any support staff that are in the building. And just having an armed officer in one end of the building, that does nothing depending on where he's placed in another side of the building. If you're in the left wing, that does nothing for security or safe feeling in the right side of the wing. What I'm saying is, I think that money can be used more, or some of that money can be used to make our buildings safer, feel safer, a safer environment, than having an armed SRO officer. I would not be in favor of that because, you know, it's not the answer to making a building safe, an armed police officer. Because as Mr. Schmidt said, it can happen in another part of the building. That officer will be ineffective if something does jump off. I mean, I think there's more that we can do and focus on and trying to make our buildings safe, secure for our students, teachers, and families and kids that we have in our buildings. And I don't think that an armed SRO officer is going to solve our issues.
I guess I'm last. I am not in favor of the SROs. I just think, especially in the elementary school, having an armed person in the building is wrong. It's just against everything. Saying that, learning how to budget and learning that you have to come and give something to get something. So, and I know this is not part of today's discussion, but I know that in curriculum and instruction, we were talking about having a teacher institute in the summer for professional development, in either paying teachers or giving them in-service credits for taking courses that they would like to take and need to become more effective teachers. Not that they're not effective now, but to become better by learning, as we all are learning every single day of our lives. So maybe that money could be used to reinstate that Teachers Institute that was cut and not being funded this year from the C&I budget.
So, just some last words. I want you to know how much I respect your position, whatever you decided. We knew from the very beginning that this was controversial, and we also know that this is a conversation boards of education are having across the entire country. Because we live in a new reality where schools aren't the safest places in America as they used to be. I have concerns with SROs in buildings as well. And I think most of us have, to some extent. It's an unknown, it's a new reality. What does it mean? And how do we ensure that our schools continue to be places that are welcoming to our staff, to our students, and to our families and community? All of those things must be considered as we attempt to harden the building. And that's what's happening. Right? When we increase cameras and we increase personnel, and we have vestibules and you have to get buzzed in, we're hardening our buildings to make sure that the people inside are safe. And unfortunately, we have people who target schools, right? The research and the statistics are sadly increasing every year, the amount of school shootings that take place. So this proposal was simply to make it clear to anyone who would even think to make our buildings a target to think twice. And so I respect your position. I thank you for weighing in and sharing how you feel about this proposal. And given that the consensus is a very strong consensus, the team and I will go back and rethink how to come back at our next board meeting with some additional items.
Madam President.
Yes, sorry, Mr.
Yes.
Go ahead.
To the superintendent. So I do believe that one of those school shootings, there was an armed guard in one of the buildings. So that does not stop that from happening.
You're right. You're right.
Any more questions on the items 620 to 1620 to 1680? Yes, Mr. Stragani.
The central data processing, does that include typists throughout the district, or is that under a different column?
No, that does not include the types across the district. They're divided up into different other codes. This covers all the software and hardware that is, and the people that handle the computer in the back end, the service for the district.
Thank you.
Board members, any other questions or comments on those items? Let's
Okay,
move on.
contractual services, codes 1910 through 1964. Any questions or comments?
Now, I was asked to read the ones we have comments on. 1964 refund on real property tax. And that's property that is split by two districts and the owner can make a choice which district for children to attend. School of choice receives the school tax. And that's a $45,000 increase.
So this were a few homes that are on the border in New Windsor and Cornwall. And so these families have opted, I'm not sure why, we're a much better district, but nevertheless, they chose Cornwall.
And it seems that 1950 is not listed on here, but it also has assessments on school property, and this is the water and sewer assessments. And the increase has, of course, has increased, as we all know, and that has increased 14.91%. That's not on our list of numbers here. So does anybody have any questions on those items?
Okay, the last section for tonight is administration, 2010 through 2060. Any questions or comments?
On 2010, there's Director of Energy Management, Owner's Rep, Supervisor of Health and PE, and BOCES Services for test scoring. Can somebody explain those? That's 2010.
And between last year's budget and this year's budget, we hired a Director of Energy Management, the owner's rep, that his salary is in the 2010. We also hired a Supervisor of Health and PE. His salary is in there. And we took the contract away from a private individual or private company and went with the BOCES service for test scoring. So it's increased over the budget years.
Board members, any questions on this section? Go ahead, Mr.
Just
Stewart.
curious, when the Director of Energy Management and the Supervisor of Health and PE were hired, do they have their own support staff that handles their day-to-day tasks?
So the owner's rep doesn't have his own staff, but he's part of the business department. PE and Health is part of the athletic office and is there with the AD and the typist who's there. That supports both of them.
So I know over the last couple of years, we've discussed this a few times, when we keep adding on administrative titles, but the support staff stays the same, it increases their workload. So I would like to see, I don't know what column it's going to be under, it's probably not tonight, but I'd like to see an increase in some support staff to handle some of the workload, because it's just, when that starts to back up, the administration of the building suffers. So if that could be included, I'm not sure what column it is on the next page, but that would be great.
Any more comments and questions? Mrs. Santiago.
I actually have I'm sorry, I have a question or just a request for clarification on this line above it, the section before it. It lists 1930s judgments and claims with an increase of 14.91%. On the budget analysis that you gave us, as someone had mentioned earlier, that 1950 is listed on there. It's the same exact amount. So which one should have the 14.91%? 1930 or 1950?
And no, it's not. 1950 is the assessment of school properties, not 1930.
Thank you.
It was, yeah, it's pushed into the wrong. Thanks for the catch.
Any other questions or comments? Is this the section where we would put that teacher institute? Or is that the next section? Is it under curriculum or is it under instruction?
Tonight, we're taking things under advisement, so as of right now, just because we're finishing this up, because the SROs are coming out, we will look at other needs the district has and begin to, we'll come back to the board, obviously, with the new budget. So,
My suggestion is, you know what, the teacher institute.
Madam President, go ahead.
Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to compliment the administration for making the effort to correct things and put things into the right category. I think that's a very helpful thing to do. And it just seems a little funny, let's see, under curriculum development and supervision 2010, our note tells us that that includes the director of energy management and the owner's representative. It's just a little confusing that that seems like a curriculum-related category. And it seems perhaps more of a business administration kind of role, both of those. Just wondering about that.
PE would be curriculum. PE and health would be curriculum. The owner's rep, the owner rep and energy management owner rep is one position.
Oh, okay.
So it's not two positions here. So yeah, I'll research that and get back to the board as required.
Thank you.
Madam President, again, I want to thank the entire board for the questions and input and comments made this evening. We will, at our next board meeting, which is next Thursday, same time as tonight, we will be going through instruction through interfund transfers, and that's 2110 through 9901. We'll obviously have to circle back based on some of the conversation that was happening tonight, but at least for your planning, we're going to go through the second part of this. And again, I have to stress, please get us your questions ahead of time, so that way we can have a good discussion on the floor. Madam President, that concludes my items for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. We're going to move on to my section. Today I have items 4.1 through 4.3 as consent items. Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, Ms. Prokop?
Yes, I'll just separate out 4.1, please.
Okay. So I'd like to have a motion on 4.2 and 4.3, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion on 4.2 and 4.3? Roll call, Ms. Clark?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stritter?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Let's go back to 4.1. I'd like to have a motion, please. Ms. Prokop, would you like to talk about that item?
Yes, under 4.1, it's actually number 5100, student attendance. When I was looking this over, there was page 3, under B. On the fourth paragraph down, it says only building administrators are authorized to change the student's attendance record. I think it should say only building administrators are authorized to change the student's attendance record after 5 days. Because if the student is absent, let's say on a Monday, and he doesn't bring his note in until Wednesday, that's within the 5 days, and that could just be changed. I don't know why an administrator would have to spend the time to do that. After 5 days, I can understand it, but before 5 days, it's just a matter of, I forgot my note today, I'm going to bring it in tomorrow. So it's not, you know, it just would be, to me, it's a lot more work for the administrators in the building. Between 1 and 5 days, it just is a matter of bringing the note in. After 5 days, then it becomes an administrative, has to change it.
So are you making a motion to amend?
I would like to make a motion to amend 5100 in that sentence to say only building administrators are authorized to change students' attendance record after 5 days.
Go ahead. So I have a motion, I have a second. Mr. Levinson, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, just for clarification, for doing that, is that designed, like Ms. Prokop says, to just change it, or is that designed to be at the discretion of the principal to change an unexcused absence to an excused absence for reasons that he would feel is correct? Is that what that sentence says?
Mr. Shaw, can you help us out with that? Because
In terms of clarity on the proposed amendment, after 5 days means a 5-day waiting period?
Yeah, because in the first paragraph, it says for absences, the written excuse for the parent or guardian should be presented by the student on the day of the return to school. The absent must present it within 5 days after returning to school. After that 5-day period, then it takes an administrator to change it. I understand that the idea behind this policy, but before the 5 days, the administrator should not have to do that paperwork.
But I understand the 5-day wait, but how open-ended is the time frame for making the change? Can they change it 4 months later?
Oh, that's the administrator's deal after that, after the 5 days.
Just raising that.
Then it becomes an administrative problem.
Mr. Levinson.
So maybe my question really is, can a building principal change an unexcused absence to excused if he felt that the circumstances warranted it? He cannot.
Mr. Forger, can you help us with that one, please?
Mr. Principal, any discretion in changing an unexcused absence to an excused absence?
I need to repeat the beginning of that.
Does a building principal have any discretion in changing an unexcused absence to an excused absence?
The way that I interpret this, only building administrators are authorized. So it's this policy gives the building administrators authorization to change the student's attendance record based on the statement that's here. And then just it has to be logged as to why it was done, the date that it was done, and the administrator that made that particular change.
That's what I get out of the policy, not have anything to do with days, for changing, just if the principal was aware of circumstances that would warrant it.
But what I hear Ms. Prokash asking is for this clause of the policy to kick in after 5 days, because what I hear Ms. Prokash saying is within 5 days of the student's absence, the parent can send in a note. That note that parent sends in, if it's aligned with our reason codes, should be the authorizing document to allow that to be an excused absence. The way we're reading and interpreting this paragraph right now is the building administrator has, once the initial record is made on that attendance, any change thereafter has to be done by the building administrator based on the way Ms. Prokash is reading and understanding that. Is that correct?
Okay, so we have a motion to amend. Do you have a question about?
Just a clarification, it's going to say 5 school days.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion to amend to put in there 5 school days. Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Could I just make a suggestion? I think we could use kind of the parallel construction to the one in the paragraph before. just say greater than 5 days, greater than 5 days, school days after returning to school. Seems like that would be the clearest. Does that make sense? The paragraph, yes, for absences. So that uses the expression, but must be presented within 5 school days after returning to school. So we use kind of the parallel verbiage around the building administrators are authorized to change a student's attendance record. Only building administrators are authorized to change a student's attendance record after beyond 5 days, beyond 5 school days after returning to school.
Are you okay with that?
As long as you do that.
It seems
You're going to
clear.
get my gist of what we're trying to say, yes.
Any other? Yes?
Somebody needs to make that motion.
Okay, so I need a motion now to amend the amendment.
So I make a motion to amend the amendment.
Okay,
To
don't
say-
say anymore.
Oh,
Can
got it.
I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any other questions?
Point of order.
Yes.
The amendment will state on this fourth paragraph, only building administrators are authorized to change a student's attendance record beyond 5 school days after returning to school.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Yes, sir?
So my original question I asked you then, after 5 days, does a building principal have the, can the building principal change an unexcused absence to an excused absence at his discretion? Because I saw a head shaking yes, and I saw a head shaking no.
It's according to the policy, there are.
Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
There are bullet points within the policy that says what an excused absence is. If it goes outside of that, he cannot do it. That's the assumption I'm under. Because we give the reasons that can allow for an unexcused absence. There's about 10 different reasons that are used.
And it has to be noted, like, I think this policy was changed just for that reason, so that we wouldn't fall into a thing that was happening before that we don't want to happen.
I understand that, and of course it should be documented, and we're hoping that the principals are doing the right thing. And I think there are times that there are situations that fall outside of the bullet points, and we have to trust someone to recognize that.
Okay, I think
What does that say?
the building administrator must consider circumstances beyond the reasonable control of the parent-child as documented in writing from the parent-child. Okay, everybody, yes?
Just to clarify, the existing policy still states that the building administrator must put the document in the file. So this is just clarifying it a little bit more about how it's supposed to be done.
Anybody else? Roll call, Mr. Clerk. This is just to amend. Amended, whatever.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Beneo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
We now have 4.1 as amended on the floor. Right, we have a motion already on that.
Yes,
Are there any other questions? Can I have Mr. Levinstein?
I just want to make my point again that I think that the student and their family should have access to the Infinite Campus information so they know what percentage they're at for absences. And if that could be worked into our portal, would be wonderful.
Go ahead, Mr. Sternard.
Is it possible to separate policy 5100 from 5411 for a vote?
Didn't we ask about separating these before?
Well, we separated from the others, but this is written as one motion.
All right, it's out of order at this point.
So I can't,
No.
so you can't separate, the way it's written, there are two, you're approving two policies in one.
Yes. So, all right, can I have a roll call, Mr. Clerk?
This is on 4.1 as amended. Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
No.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinson?
Yes.
I have one more item, that's item 4.4, the first reading of policy number 8630, and that's computer resources and data management. Questions and discussion? Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to board committees. Library Committee, Mr. Johnson.
Madam President, the Library Committee met on Wednesday, March 9. The Early Literacy Librarian, Ms. Sarah Scogan, gave us a presentation about early literacy activities at the library, which includes collaboration with the school district in adopting the Uter Basics as a framework and a model for the library's early literacy programs. Library staff will be participating in the Literacy for Hope and Change conference at Montgomery College later this month, and the library budget was reviewed. It is much in line with last year's budget with a few tweaks, and there's approximately a 1.5% increase overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, Policy Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. On March 6th, the policy committee met, and we went over we wrapped up 5100 and 5411. We also discussed the policies that were brought to the board this evening on computer resources, data management, number 5151 homeless children, and 8460 use of telephones. And we also did an update on NECSD policies that have been recently passed, but the old items were not deleted from our record. So we deleted some of the old numbers and updated some of the newer to the school association policies. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Audit and Finance Committee. Mrs. Santiago.
Mr. Chairman. We met actually right before today's meeting, and most of the items are under finance today.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam President. This evening I have one item, resolution to authorize the superintendent to execute an agreement with participatory budgeting project.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stern.
So are they going to be, are they going to be looking at the individual school's budget? Is that how this is going to work? What are they looking at?
So I provided you with a small video of how it's done in Arizona. This is a requirement through ESSA that all of the comprehensive support schools across the state have to engage in. It is a dollar amount that is determined by the district to be allocated to each of those CSI schools. So it can be $1,000, it can be $5,000, it can be $10,000. This provides an opportunity for the students, the faculty, staff, parents, and community to get together to say, what is one thing that we want to do as a comprehensive team, as a collective team, to do, whether it's a beautification project for the school, whether it's materials and resources for the school. There's a lot of flexibility and latitude with how they plan or utilize the funds. There's a session that's going to take place next week in New York City. It is sponsored by the State Education Department and the Participatory Budgeting Project, which is this particular agreement, where we are sending the advisors that are on this particular agenda as well when you get to human resources, with the principals from both South Middle School and Vales Gate to get the specifics as to how to execute this particular project.
As a follow-up, if we have $5,000 allocated to South Middle School and Vales Gate, say $5,000 each, but we're spending $11,000 on training.
So we're not spending, well, we are spending it through a federal grant that the state has provided us to do a pilot project with us. So our hope is that we learn this particular project, we understand how to do it. It is a mandate under ESSA. It is not a choice for the school district. It is a mandate that we comply with this. We are taking part in a pilot this year, but it is a requirement that it be implemented next year. So we're kind of getting ahead of the curve, using additional resources that are provided to us to support this, to learn how to do it, so that next year we're not expending our own resources. We already know how to do it if we have new CSI schools. You're welcome.
Any other questions, Mr. Johnson?
Is the dollar amount per school 5,000? And just how did that amount get determined? Is that at the district's discretion?
The dollar amount allocated for the budgeting has not been set yet. We will be setting that soon. Whether we'll use title or general funds is, again, something we have not discussed yet. You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr.
So what determines the dollar amount for each school? What's the criteria?
So we could have had that conversation earlier. However, we felt it more important that the teams go to New York City to engage in the training, to get a collective understanding as to what the expectations are, so that when they come back, we can learn what the expectations are from the state, and then make that determination. So we'll use the criteria that's discussed in New York City next week when these teams go to get the training, and then we will determine what amount is allocated to the schools.
And that's from this year's budget or the 1920 budget?
It would be from it depends if we're using federal funds or general funds. It would obviously be for the 1920 school year.
So we need to budget that money somehow.
But yes.
Anybody else, questions or comments on this item? Roll call, Mr. Clark.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Strumeyer?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my item.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Elementary, Mrs. Fritz.
Good evening, Madam President. This evening, we're proposing items 7.1 through 7.3 as part of a consent agenda.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Strumeyer? Yes. Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes our CNI items for this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Felice. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent of Exceptional Learners, Mr. Bayer.
Thank you, Madam President. I have one item for this evening. It's the recommendations from the CSE and CPSE committees.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton? Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Strumeyer?
Thank you. That concludes my item for the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Mr. Kern.
Thank you, Madam President. Finance would like to offer for consent agenda items 9.1 through 9.4.
Okay. Would any member like to separate out any of these items, 9.1 through 9.4 only? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion on those items? Roll call, Mr. Clark.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Strumeyer?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Item 9.5, resolution of the Board of Education of the City of the District of the City of Newburgh, Orange County, New York, specifying in detail the necessity for the construction and equipping of a new school building and additions, alterations, renovations, and other improvements to the district's existing school buildings and facilities.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Yes, sir.
I feel there are 2 points where this plan falls short, and I would ask the board to consider these points. First, the financing of the project, and where the money to pay for this work comes from. Some employers have a retirement savings plan for employees, and if you're lucky, your employer contributes to the plan. A generous employer might contribute 50% towards your savings contributions. And if you're an employee, this is great for you. You put $100 into a savings account. Your employer matches your contribution. You have $200 saved for retirement. What if your employer contributed 90%? That would be great. You would put in $100, and you'd have $1,000 in retirement savings. Now, the way that the financing works for the Newburgh School District with New York State Building Aid, it works a little bit like that. The percent aid for some items can be nearly 90%. The details that I'm talking about here are all spelled out in a document that you can find on board docs at the September 25 regular BOE meeting, item 2.4. The proposal before us has three main components. The largest item is repairs and renovations across the district. This costs $123 million. The local taxpayer contribution on that amount is only $21 million. That's great. It's about 1/6. We get a lot of repairs, and the effect on the local taxpayer is well under control. It's unfortunate, and there's been mention of this, it's unfortunate that so many repairs are needed, but this is an opportunity to catch up and get the repairs done by taking advantage of what New York State provides, building aid for our district. The smallest item in the plan, the smallest of the three components, is the air quality improvements around the district, air conditioning. That's at around $60 million total. The local taxpayer contribution on that is around $15 million. Again, that's a really nice return. 75% of the costs will be covered by New York State aid. This promises improvement across classrooms across the district, like the repairs and renovations. It will benefit the entire district. The item in the middle, as far as costs, second of three, I suppose, is a new CTE building. Cost of this building is $75 million. The local taxpayer contribution on that is $50 million. So most of the cost will be covered by district taxpayers. The local cost of the CTE building alone far exceeds the local cost for the repairs and renovations and the air quality improvements combined. Without the CTE building, the district would get a tremendous benefit at very limited local taxpayer impact. The second point to consider is whether a large new CTE building is the best investment the district can make at this time. In order to answer that question for myself, I have repeatedly asked for a written rationale, an explanation of what benefits the building would bring to the district, what goals are to be met by a new CTE building, and what do we expect to be the outcomes. I have not received adequate answers. There are a lot of specific ways to question the CTE building. The logistics of how students will get there, scheduling, many of these questions came up at our last meeting. How will the vacant spaces be used in NFA Maine? Staffing costs. Does it make sense to segregate these classes into a separate building? And there are accessibility questions. We've heard these are good questions. There is one question that perhaps we overlooked. Is there anything more important? My answer is yes. And as a reference, I would point you to the January 22 meeting, item 3.3, assessment data. Grades 3 through 8, ELA proficiency is 31%. For some subgroups, proficiency is significantly lower. Now, honestly, I don't know if there's any building or construction project that would help the district address that, and maybe there isn't. But improving literacy is a goal that must have priority. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to make a comment? Go ahead, Ms. Prakash on 9.5.
Yes, I would. Being on the committee for well over 2 years, and I understand some people don't like the idea of a CTE building. Any new construction is going to be paid by the state at a less percentage. But if we're going to, as a school district, inspire students to become leaders beyond academy field, we have to think of many of our students, not just the students that are going to college. We have adequate programs for them, and we're going to increase them. We have, as a district, been working on increasing the reading level. But the state has put out new pathways to learning that include CTE programs. And to say that students going to CTE are not worthy of the other students in our district, I think is an unbelievably bad thing to try to project. There are students waiting that our district does not have the accommodations in nursing. There's a waiting list because we don't have the room for it. There's students in the welding class that can't work when the auto mechanics is working because we needed room in our NFA main and we cut that out and we moved them out to the auto shop. Students that want to go into related fields that are not necessarily college, but are certificates that they'd be making a good wage on. And we did not slip this in, like some people are saying. The CTE building was from the get-go. It was from the beginning. The rooms that are going to be vacated by putting them in a separate building are going to be used at NFA Main to make the educational system there even better, because they're overcrowded and in some places in the 1927 building, not adequate. So I think what we're trying to do, and what we have been trying to do for the last 2 years, is make the best possible thing we can for the students within this district so that we can inspire all students to become leaders, whether they're teachers, whether they're professors, whether they're lawyers, or whether they're a welding person, a welding master welder that's making $100,000 a year. We want to do the best we can for every single student in our district. And I think the reading level, we want to work on every single student, whether they go to the CTE center as a high school student or not. We're taking $700,000 for not SRO officers. Yes, I believe we should be putting some of that into our literacy programs. But to say one is better than the other, to me, is not fair to all the students in the district. And when we saw the figures last week, 98 cents per $100,000 as a senior citizen is not going to break me. It's not going to break me. If it's for the students within this district to have a better life when they go beyond the academy field.
Anybody else have a comment or question about 9.5? Yes, Ms. Santiago.
I can obviously see all sides, and we have to understand that education, our children, our communities are changing and so forth. I believe it's something for the voters to decide. But my question is, if this fails, what happens then for the repairs? How do they get done?
There could be another bond that's put up to deal with those issues. If the district repair is so severe, the board can actually call it an ordinary contingent expense and pay for it, but cannot bond for it. So that would have to be out of a general fund budget.
Mr. Strickland.
Under that situation, would SED still need to provide approval for the repairs?
If you would need a certificate of occupancy based upon the repairs, you would definitely need their approval, and also there are certain standards when they have to give you pre-approval.
Mrs. Santiago.
Thank you. Would we still get the same state aid if we had to go back to another bond? Would we still get the same state aid?
Beth, can you come and address the question? You're the fiscal advisor. I think I know the answer, but I don't want to misspeak.
Yes, if you're going to be going through a bond issue, you would be getting the same state aid.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Mr. Strickland?
Madam President?
I'll be with you and let Mr. Strickland know.
I'm just curious, the way that the bond is structured, you have two separate votes. The first vote is the $198 million, and then the second is $59 million, roughly. At what point were the items put into the categories, okay, this is going to be the first one,
and this is gonna be the second, because if you look at it, the way that Mr. Johnson described it, wouldn't you want the first one to get the most aid, and then the second one, that would be the least amount of state aid matching, would be the second one that would need, does the second one always need this 67%? Like, how did that come about? How is it structured that way? Because it seems like you would structure the most aid in the first proposal. Mark, you haven't done that one.
To fully understand how we got to where we are in the layout of the different schools, it requires an understanding of the history. Because we have entertained from the beginning of the committee research in a number of different scopes that along the way were eliminated just because of the cost and the impact of the taxpayer. We structured the layout of Proposition 1 and its layout of Proposition 2 so that they stood the best chance to both be successful. Within Proposition 1, you have many scopes of work that are highly aidable, as Mr. Johnson pointed out, and then you have others that were not as high, for example, the CTE Center. So when you combine those scopes of work, the impact of the taxpayer, which was key in us making our final decision, was significantly less because it was averaged out to have less of an impact. The Proposition 2, we understood that it's more than likely that it would pass, so so we decided to make that decision to stand that scope of work on its own.
So it's discretionary.
So if you did move the air conditioning to the first one and move the CT to the second one, would you still have the same impact to the taxpayer, the 98 cents per 100,000, or would it be a different number?
Yes, there certainly would be a change in the tax impact if you're going to move projects around.
Would it be lower or higher?
So if you took the 59 million and put it into the first proposition and you took the CTE and made it stand on its own, intuitively, the first proposition would be lower, but taken together, they would have the same budget impact as 1 and 2 do currently together.
It's just a matter of trying to get there.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President. So, I remember 3 or 4 years ago when we sat down, actually 5 years ago, maybe 6, we talked about working on our mission and vision statement for our district. And when we came up with the idea of bringing our children so they can be successful beyond academy field, college and career ready. College and career ready. Career ready is the CTA boom right now. And I think this is an opportunity for us to allow our children, our students, to be on a level playing field with other students around the state and who they will be competing with once they get out of 12th grade and they cross the academy field and they go to the Northwest. There's a large population of children in our district who are not going to college, as my colleague Ms. Crocott said. We need to do a better idea of how we can better serve those students now, so when they get out of NFA at the 12th grade level, they can go into college to careers to make money so they can support their family, make a living, earning wages, and preparing them now for the CTE explosion that's going on. I think it's a great idea. I mean, you're talking about, we have waiting lists for nursing, we have other programs that we can expand, and other different CTE programs that can be added, the welding, the automotive that they used to have when I was at NFA. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to get a state-of-the-art facility for our children to take those CTE courses, get out into the real world, and become successful. To me, it's a no-brainer, and I think the idea should pass, and I'm hoping that this board can support what we're moving forward.
Mr. Mr. Levinstein.
So, I think, from what I've been led to believe, partly an answer to Mr. Tridar's question, is that there are bonding limits, and the bonding limit signifies that we just need 50% and one vote, where anything beyond that, we need a supermajority of 60%. So I think that's the reason sometimes things are structured the way they are and where they fall out. And also, I support what Ms. Brokash says, and just about all of what she says, and I think that we should go forward with this.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Yes, I'd just like to say two things. First, all the students blossom at different times. Some might start fourth grade and just explode. Others may take a little longer. So we have to have the facilities to catch those kids. To have this type of building, I think would be a plus. Last week, I think it was, I attended that library meeting, and where the expert talked about statistics and how that by the third grade, if a student doesn't know so many words, he or she might be lost forever. So that's a bubble of students right there. If we have that building, who's to say that we can't use it for the elementary schools? Let's say we can bring them, the students who need that extra help as an extra thing, to come up to the high school and maybe be tutored by one of the high school kids or something like that, then go back. Mentoring programs. A lot of things I think could happen with that. But I understand what you're saying about the ELA, because those statistics were, about the literacy programs, those were very frightening to me. Thank you.
Mr. Stritter, you had something else?
Yeah, I think to equate the support for the program, the CT program, with the support for the way the bond is structured, it's not easy. I support the CTE program. I mean, I work in CTE, and that's what I do. I mean, there's a huge need for CTE. But the way this is structured, we can't just look at this from the educational point of view. We represent taxpayers as well. So, I mean, as far as the nursing program, if you look at the layout on this sketch, it's actually smaller. It's only one room, and I have 2 rooms over at North. So it's just, I think that if you were to switch it around, I don't want this bond to go down because taxpayers see the CTE building in the first one and say, no way. I want to get the repairs to the buildings done. And if that can be accomplished, you know, the tower, the Vales Gate, all the repairs, priority 1 and hopefully more with Proposition 1, that would be great. And if you get the air conditioning, the quality, it's going to increase the education of all the kids, and the people in the buildings will be able to work in spaces that are considered normal. I mean, right now, air quality in the buildings is poor. So the way it's structured is what I'm against. I'm not against the CTE program. I actually like the CTE building, but I think the way it's structured, it should be the separate item that the taxpayers can look at and say, you know what? We're fully behind that. We're going to vote for that as the second proposition.
Any other questions of Mr. Johnson?
Just a comment. I agree very much with Mr. Stridiron's point. And I believe if the bond proposals were restructured as he describes, if the repairs and renovations were combined with the air quality as Proposition 1, it's hard to imagine how that could fail. I would say that that's virtually assured to get the public's approval. Anyone who understands the amount of state aid that we're eligible for and the amount that we get returned from New York State to accomplish these repairs, renovations that affect the entire school district, I think it's impossible to see how that would fail. And I like the idea, and I no one gets the impression that I don't support the CT program. I think they do wonderful work. I've seen them work, and I think one of the virtues and one of the great things about the program is how accessible it is to NFA Maine. I think that's something that it really has going for it. I would like to see the proposals restructured. And I would make a motion to table the resolution before us for that purpose.
Okay, we have a motion to table. I can't do any more discussion. We need a second, okay? Roll call to table.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
No.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
No.
Ms. Mineo?
No.
Ms. Prokop? Mr. Scrivener?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
No.
Mr. Walker?
No.
That item fails.
Okay, so we now have a motion on the floor still. Ms. Prokop.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Mr. Ramjo and Beth, when we talked about the 198, was that not 98 cents per $100,000? And we talked about the air conditioning, how much was that?
My notes from last month, $1 something.
It was $1 something, right?
$1.82.
So the $198,000 is 98 cents per 100,000. The air conditioning is $1 something. So 198 is 98 cents per 100,000. And together, they're not even talking $4. And it's not going to be even assessed for 7 years.
Together, they're $1.82. Together. So it's 98 cents for Proposition 1.
Right.
For Proposition 2, for both, excuse me, for 1 and 2 together, it's $1.82.
$1.82.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Roll call, Mr. Clerk, on that first amendment.
9.5. Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener?
No.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Item 9.6, this requires a 3/5 majority of the board to pass. Bond resolution of the Board of Education of the City School District of the City of Newburgh, Orange County, New York, adopted March 12, 2019, authorizing the construction and equipping of a new school building and additions, alterations, renovations, and other improvements to the district's existing school buildings and facilities, estimating that the total cost therefore is $198 million, appropriating said amount therefore and authorizing the issue of $188 million in serial bonds of the district to finance said appropriation.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Johnston?
No.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener?
No.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
That item passes.
Item 9.7, resolution of the Board of Education of the City School District of the City of Newburgh, Orange County, New York, specifying in detail the necessity for the upgrades and improvements of the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and air circulation systems in all of the district's existing school buildings and facilities.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Item 9.8, this requires 3/5 of a board majority to pass. Bond resolution of the Board of Education of the City School District of the City of Newburgh, Orange County, New York, adopted March 12, 2019, authorizing upgrades and improvements to the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and air circulation systems in all of the district's existing school buildings and facilities. Estimating the total cost therefore is $59 million, appropriating said amount therefore and authorizing the issuance of $59 million in serial bonds of the district to finance said appropriation.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Studeiner?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Item 9.9, resolution of the Board of Education of the City School District of the City of Newburgh, Orange County, New York, authorizing the submission of 2 propositions to be voted upon by the qualified voters of said district at the annual meeting thereof to be held on May 21st, 2019.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? No? Did anybody second that?
Second.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Studeiner?
No.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
No.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes the items of finance for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Mr. Mack.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, consent agenda items 10.1 through 10.11, I'd like to request permission to amend to table 10.11.
Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is, first of all, I'd like to see if any member would like to separate out. We're going to look at 10.1 through 10.10 first. Would anybody like to separate out any of these items? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion 10.1 through 10.10. Thank you. Questions or discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Studeiner?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
We're going to move on to item 10.11. I'd like a motion to table, please.
So moved.
Point of order, so we have to put it on the floor first, and then we can table it.
Okay, so I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Now I need a motion to table.
Motion table.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Burke?
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw? Mr. Studeiner?
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. We're going to move on to our clerk of the board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have approval of the minutes from the February 26, 2019 meeting.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Thank you. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Mr. Johnston? Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Brokaw?
Yes.
Mr. Studeiner?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
So if there's anybody interested in running for the board, petition packets are available in my office Monday through Friday. The current positions are held by Mr. Levinstein, Mr. Johnston, and Mrs. Pocock. Those will be the three seats up for election. If you'd like to contact me, there's certainly give you the packet of information. That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedure sheet next to the sign-in sheet. I have someone signed up first, Mary DiGilio.
Thank you. My name is Mary DiGilio. I've been a resident of the district since 2003, and I'm here today to make comments regarding the letter that went out to families. I learned back in January this letter went out. I just learned of the letter actually yesterday. Just got a copy of it a few hours before the board meeting regarding the non-busing, or excuse me, the busing for non-public school children over the 15-mile current state law for the 15-mile radius. So I know currently the district buses to both Our Lady of Lourdes and Burke High School, And while we know the state law is 15 miles, every area is a little different, and there's just not that many options at the high school level, especially for families that do need to choose a non-public option, whether it be for religious reasons, whether it be for environmental. Some children just need a smaller school. So, sometimes there's special needs or there's family situations. So that has always been a godsend, and I appreciate the board being so friendly to those of us that chose non-public schools for that long. I also know that it served as a win-win situation because while we as families were getting the benefit of busing, we still pay our full tax bill. We don't get any discount or any voucher, as you know. But the district benefited because they didn't have to incur the full cost of educating our children. So I'm sure if you weigh the cost of busing each of our students to actually the cost of educating students, I'm sure there's a big difference there. And yet, like I said, we're still paying our full tax bill. The other benefit that I know was discussed for many years, and I heard it again tonight, was the issue of overcrowding. So I know currently there's 2 full buses that go to Our Lady of Lourdes, and there's 1 bus that goes to Burke. I can't speak for other non-public schools that the district may bus to or the elementary level, but I know those 3 buses still remain. And I would think that there has to be some consideration regarding now what the cost would be of now having to absorb those children, as well as the logistics of having to absorb those children. Because reality is, if you don't provide busing, it's going to be very hard for families to now transport those kids to those schools. So there would be a sudden impact and probably a long impact, because now you're not just talking 1 year, you're talking sequential years. Because kids that are graduating from the elementary parochial schools, well, they want to go to these schools, but now there's no busing. Now you're ending that pipeline, and now the district is going to need to absorb that. Excuse me, my mouth is dry, sorry, I've been sitting too long. The other thing is that I found it interesting, because in this letter, it mentioned that there was a vote back in 2007 that this expansion of the radius from 15 to 18 went down. I found that very interesting. I'm not here to question the integrity of that information, but I found it interesting because I had children busing in that time frame, and I received no information about this vote. I don't recall ever seeing it on a ballot. I'm wondering how it was worded on a ballot, where I would not even realize this was directly impacting me and my family and my friends and my children. So it makes me wonder, if it goes back into a ballot form and a resolution form, how much is really the general voting public going to understand what this means? Do they understand that cost-benefit analysis of what it costs to bus a child versus now to fully absorb them into the education system? Do they understand the logistics that are going to be complicated because of this influx of children? And is it really fair to ask them to vote on something that they really don't understand? I told several people today about this that have no knowledge of parochial school or non-public school busing, and they said, honestly, I never would have thought of that. I had no idea. They're just going to see it on the ballot and say, oh, 15 to 18 miles, why should you get that? No. And is that really fair to any of us here, or any of you guys, or any of our public schools, non-public schools, any of the families that are currently using this, to just go forward in that manner? So I'm asking you all to reconsider the approach to this.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Nancy Gutierrez? Do you have a comment, or? Okay, thank you. You just signed it, it's great, thank you. I'm glad that you're here. It's good. William Walker.
Yes. I thought that Okay.
Can you go to the mic? Because you're going to speak as a community member. Yeah.
I'm just gonna talk, everybody else has to deal with it. Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm here to just make a comment about school security. We talked about guns being brought to the school, an armed guard, etc. What I'd like to see, if it doesn't already exist, is an annual training program for teachers about how to respond with various scenarios. When I was teaching, there was a health issue that we had to watch on through a video, and we had to sign that we had watched it. So each year, we were reminded of this particular health issue. I think the same thing should carry through in terms of teachers knowing the security regulations, knowing how to behave in certain situations is very important. We've seen on television how when something very serious goes down, it's the students and the teachers who depend upon each other first. And so we've got to make sure that, I'm not saying that we don't, but we've got to make sure that that teaching, that instruction is ongoing. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board? Please come up and state your name and where you live.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the board. My name is Frank Liccanelli. I've taught leadership and officership at West Point and ROTC for many years. I currently help write profession ethic and character development doctrine for the Army. And I've trained young, aspiring Army leaders, both mentally and physically, for nearly 4 decades as a combat veteran. But most importantly, I come here tonight as a concerned parent. I know you've already passed Resolution 5411 this evening. I was hoping to bring some of this to your attention earlier. Unfortunately, I missed the sign. Excuse me. However, I do want to bring a couple of concerns to your attention related to this now policy on student extracurricular activities and interscholastic athletics. First, I applaud your efforts to improve policy on academics, attendance, conduct, and monitoring. I'd like, however, to ask for clarification of a few concerns that I and some other parents, at least 5 of us here this evening, have. Number one, academic eligibility, understood. Clear, simple, good policy. The issue you discussed earlier, as far as attendance eligibility, here's where we have a couple of questions. It talks about 91% attendance to be eligible to participate. And as was mentioned, it would be nice to know where a student stands. You know, I'm guessing that equates to about 10 days, plus or minus, maybe. I'm uncertain of that. And based upon that, they would not be eligible to participate. Then it goes on to talk about what you discussed tonight, the 5-day rule for unexcused absences. And it states, one unexcused absence not cleared in 5 days, they are ineligible to participate in the next school activity, athletic practice, whatever, or game, a meet, etc. However, my concern, and this is from my own experience with my daughter, who's on the track team, is that when you turn in an excuse letter, which my daughter did the day after an absence for being sick, okay, she has migraines, she brought in an absence note the next day, somehow got lost, misplaced, whatever, she wound up going into that 5-day thing. It also happened to be when she was notified, was then on a holiday weekend. So it pushed it back an additional day into the following week. And anyway, make a long story short, we finally got it straight. It took nearly 2 weeks of effort. Part of the reason for that is, number one, whatever the policy is in the attendance office, there is one person who currently inputs that information to clear the student. And guess what happened at that time? They were not there on those days, so it pushed it back a few days. She missed practices. She missed a meet the following week. Brought in a second letter and still tried to do it. Now it's beyond the 5 days. Now, people didn't want to deal with it. At least that was the impression. Finally, they resolved the issue, but it caused her to miss tracking, caused her to miss numerous practices, okay, which then count against her as well. In addition, I should mention that the attendance office has an invalid email. Okay, there's an old email, which is still on some of the websites, that's out there that doesn't work. So if you send a letter to there, it's going nowhere. Okay, on to other issues related to this. So that's for clearance. Bottom line, don't want to inadvertently penalize students. Number 2, behavior. For violations of code of conduct issued to participants, by activity supervisor, or coach. Makes sense. However, who approves this? The coach just makes up their own guidelines. Okay? I've seen both with teachers and coaches unenforceable, unrealistic rules, and in some cases flat out misinformation issued by teachers and coaches to students and athletes. Okay? Monitoring, last thing. Well, students and parents are supposed to be informed of this requirement. Needs open communication. These also have clear enforcement repercussions for student athletes. However, what are the guidelines and rules of conduct for coaches? There's expectations for coaches in the athletic handbook.
Mr. Locumel?
Yes.
I'm sorry, the 5 minutes are up, so I'm going to have to cut you off, but I promise that somebody will call you back tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Would anybody else like to address the board on non-agenda items? Come, please, and state your name for 5 minutes.
Good evening. I would like to see if I could have, my name is Erin Sanchez. I would like to see if we could have Mr. Palila here. I am interested if you could listen to this too, please.
I don't know what he's doing right outside of the hall. Can you stop the timer for a second, please?
Like I said, my name is Erin Sanchez. I'm here tonight on behalf of my daughter, Giselle Marino, a student at South Middle School. I am here to address an issue that I know you're all familiar with, bullying and assault. About 2 weeks ago, my daughter was assaulted by 2 girls around the age of 15. She was beaten by these 2 girls and her head was pounded to the ground. I had to take her to the hospital, and thank God she had no suffer to her brain or any concussion or cracked skull. After the beating that my daughter had, victimized once again with a video that 2 girls placed on social media to embarrass her. My daughter does not want to go back to school. She is fearful, traumatized, and most importantly, does not feel supported. When I tried to speak to the suit, I was directed to a person who we met, only spoke with my daughter and did not feel heard. And then I did not feel it was addressed and it was not taken care of as I wanted to. My daughter, like any other, deserves a safe environment and supported environment. When she feel comforted, where she can feel comforted, protected by adults who are responsible for her safety. This kind of attack to my daughter suffer are not one-time offense. There has been a few that have happened that I have heard. There must be programs that address the bullying issue. Many of our children are, have taken their lives in many cases as a result of these behaviors. I am a mother who would like to think that our schools won't have this kind of incidents. These two girls walked away with a few days of suspension after the BNN videos posted, and it's beyond my understanding. There is a problem, and it is up to the administrators and teachers to get it right. I don't want to be that parent who will go to a hospital and see my child hurt in a manner that will negatively impact everyone's life. I am here today to promise to continue to speak up and get right agencies behind me to make the right changes. I trust that all of you here hear my message tonight and reflect and think about what next step should look and should be taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody will touch base with you at the end of the meeting, okay? Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board? Please come and state your name, please.
Good evening. My name is Iris Cadero, and I'm a resident for over 11 years. I also come on behalf of the Church of God, 85 Dixon Street. We have a congregation over 300, and most of the members there are non-English speaking people. I and my husband are one of the few couples that speak English and understand a little bit of the educational system. Many of our parents feel silenced because they don't know how to address the issues. And so when they come to me, I'm able to guide them, give them advice, and sometimes even reach the schools and speak to the principals, which takes me away from my work, but nevertheless, somebody has to do this. It's disturbing to me that I have found some incidents in our schools here and how they have handled it. I'm not here to judge today or point fingers, but more importantly, to raise awareness about how we can become more preventive. I heard a lot of talk about infrastructure and guard, police people, surveillance, but what about educating the child from kindergarten on about how to deal with conflicts? And I don't know if that's happening, but when I hear the incidents that are taking place, and I go into these schools and I'm looking for the programs that are addressing these issues, they're absent. And so, as I said, I'm not here to judge, but to give advice maybe about how do we begin to talk to our kids about dealing with conflict? How do we train our teachers on how to be more mindful or more assertive on language? Because it just doesn't blow up automatically. Something has to be said, something has to be seen before the incident takes place. And I'm grappling with the fact that we're all educators, we want the best for our students, but what about those pieces, the social emotional pieces? I know that Newburgh is a difficult district. I know. We have pockets of children that come from families that don't have the structure, that don't have the means or the guidance or the tools. But it's up to us. It's up to us, the people around this table, the people that know, the parents who perhaps don't have voice, especially these Latino parents who, when they come into our settings, don't have the people to guide them or to feel comforted, because this is what I hear repeatedly at the church. I'm feeling dismissive, I'm not feeling heard. Aaron just spoke about how an interview took place and not once was she heard. We prescribed something without hearing the parent. I'm going to continue to be that advocate for these parents. I'm going to continue to be involved. I don't come bringing problems. I believe that if there's a problem, there has to be a solution. And if I have that solution, then I have to offer it. But I think we have to do a better job, because what we're seeing is young people attacking other people, assaulting other people, and there are other ways that we have to teach them. We have to teach them how to be responsible civic personnel, right? We're training them to go out into the world one day and become responsible human beings. And by suspending them and not addressing the issue, it's not going to fix the problem. Suspensions are a consequence, and I understand sometimes they have to happen, but how do we talk to these young people about when you're having an issue with another peer, how do we talk to each other as opposed to taking a rock or banging someone's head on the pavement, which is what happened to Eric's daughter. That's what I'm here to say today, and I thank you for listening. It's my first time before your board, and I suspect if it continues, I'm going to continue to come back. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to address the board on non-agenda items? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting, please. Roll call.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Neneo?
Yes.
Ms. Pocock? Mr. Goodire?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Good night. We'll see you in 1 week.